Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on resetting manufacturing in a post-COVID economy. Over the course of the next hour, we'll be looking at Britain's place in the world as it leaves the EU in the midst of the coronavirus crisis and think about what this means for industry. And I'm delighted to be joined by a really brilliant panel to pick through all this today. You probably know Stephen Phipson, who's Chief Executive of Make UK. Julian Braithwaite is the UK's ambassador and permanent representative to the WTO World Trade Organization in Geneva. But Mark Bottomley is North Region Sales Director at Rockwell Automation. Namisha Raja is the founder and managing director of Nim's Fruit and Veg Crisps. Mike Maddock is the managing director at Performance Engineered Solutions. And Sam Lowe, last but not least, is Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Reform. We have lots to cover. Please do send your questions in. But the first topic is really all about the global context. The geopolitical picture has been difficult over the last few years with heightened economic tensions and trade wars, and now the vast disruption caused by COVID. But what does all this mean for the next 5 years? Julian, I wonder whether we could start with you. The WTO is obviously at the heart of all this. Are you confident that things might get quieter sometime soon?
Well, thank you, Callum, and good afternoon, everybody. So, the WTO's been making the news for the wrong reasons, really, in the last couple of years. It's been making the news because of disagreements over how it's run, disagreements over how the dispute settlement system in the WTO should work, the Americans being rather critical of that. And most recently, we've had a selection process for the new Director General that has ended with an impasse because the US administration was not prepared to go along with the recommendation of the process of appointing the Nigerian candidate as the next Director General of the WTO. So, the headlines out of the WTO are not great, but I wanted to just underline the point that today's World Trade Organization sits on 70 years of trade negotiations and trade liberalizations, hundreds, thousands of pages of agreement about how to liberalize trade, which has opened up markets around the world over the years since the Second World War, and which we all still benefit from today. So there's an enormous, it's a bit like an iceberg. There's the sort of controversy on the top, the bit you see, but underneath are all of these rules and regulations about how to trade openly and freely around the world, which stem from the WTO. And those are still in place. Hopefully, over the next 5 years, we will see, possibly with the new US administration coming in, we may see more re-engagement by them into the WTO, which would obviously be welcome. And we will need, though, to ensure that both the developing members, who now make up the majority of the WTO, and also the developed members who started the organization, come together in a new compact around how to continue to liberalize trade around the world, because that perhaps lies at as the biggest issue dividing the membership of the WTO today. But this is something that the UK, coming out of the EU, wants to play an important role in helping to bridge, given our links around the world, and particularly our links with developing countries.
Thank you. And Stephen, I wonder how important you think the backdrop is on the global stage for manufacturers in the UK.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Callum, for the question. Well, obviously, for manufacturers, exporting is absolutely vital, and currently in the UK, about 53% of exports are manufactured goods. We've done extremely well, punching way above our weight. We're one of the top world exporters. And so the rules, first of all, I think it's important to say that the rules-based system, the WTO system, is absolutely vital to continuing that manufacturing export from the UK. It's absolutely really, really important that people have a certain environment to export in. And there's a lot of support from all of the manufacturers around making sure that that's there. There are some headwinds, though, and there are some things, some challenges that we should highlight, as well as some of the points that Julian made earlier. One of the successes we've had over the last 25, 30 years has been due to proximity of business. Proximity is everything with manufacturing, and our integrated supply with the EU, if you look at the exports there, which is, if you're taken as a block, is the largest destination for EU exports, is all about integrated supply chain work. And that's because of proximity, and that's worked extremely well. And obviously we have to make sure that that in some way is protected and can continue on, because it's a very large volume, and that's the reason why there's been lots of discussion with the government and with the Prime Minister in particular, and now with Michael Gove, about making sure we have that good trade deal coming from the EU as we exit, to make sure that proximity business can continue. That's vital. We're also seeing an interesting trend now as a result of the pandemic, with many companies now thinking more about supply chain resilience than they ever thought about before. So we've been through a period of the last 10 years of really extending, under some fantastic logistics opportunities, our supply chains to every corner of the planet, taking advantage of those that rules-based system, supplying parts for Aston Martins from Wuhan in China, and everything else that you can imagine. I mean, it's been a really efficient build-up of an integrated global supply chain. But now the question is about resilience. Is that the right thing to do? What we've seen is many constraints to manufacturing, which has continued through the lockdown. But one of the big constraints has been the supply chain side of it, because of the other areas being locked down. And there's a lot more consideration now around resilience. And is that an opportunity to onshore more of the manufacturing, but indeed have closer partners, not so far away, that we can actually rely on to build resilience into that supply chain? So watch this space, Callum. There's going to be a lot of debates around that. And of course, the real opportunity, the last point I'll make on this question, is around new technology. We are extremely good at innovative technologies. Mike Maddock will talk about that later on. But I've had some, in discussions we've been having with DIT around the new trade deals that we are working on at the moment, and indeed with those ambassadors and high commissioners that have actually reached out to us about working closely with the UK manufacturing base. It's been around those new technologies. It's been around hydrogen, it's been around CCUS, it's been around the green agenda. And the UK has a really good offer there, and something that we think is part of the growth for the future. So although we have these headwinds in terms of proximity and resilience, we also have some really good, strong opportunities going forward, which we can take advantage of. And all of that is around the innovation that comes from the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sam, it's obviously been a volatile few years. What are you expecting in the years ahead?
So it has been a volatile few years, and I suppose here I'm going to be slightly optimistic, because sort of 2020 has been a bit of a rough year, but the last couple of weeks I think there has been quite a lot of good news, at least from my perspective. And I think it is possible that if we do see a vaccine arrive next year, and appreciating that one of the impacts of coronavirus and the economic restrictions that have come along with it has been a sort of bifurcated, and it's been a sort of bifurcated impact, in that some people have lost their jobs, but the people who have retained their jobs have actually been saving quite heavily over the course of this year. And the UK is currently running a trade surplus, and that's because of the collapse of imports, if you take out gold and precious metals. So there is a possibility that if the vaccine does come in fairly early next year and gets rolled out comprehensively across the globe, that we actually go into quite a boom couple of years, because all of a sudden all of that saving starts to get spent. And this is an optimistic scenario, of course, and there are other scenarios that aren't as optimistic, but that could actually lead to potentially quite a few good years, even taking into account the fact that the UK's trade with the EU is going to become more difficult, and it's going to take a while to work out what the UK wants to do with the rest of the world. If the economic environment improves massively, that could be excellent. I think in terms of the broader regional trends, some have been mentioned, this idea of resilience, and now people are looking at, I'm not sure it's so much onshoring as more diversifying out of China. I think, if people are being honest, if you think of the different projects that are in place, you've got Buy America in the US, which is part of Biden administration's agenda, so it's here to stay in some form or other. In the UK, you have Project Defend. In the EU, you have strategic autonomy. I think they sometimes put open strategic autonomy in front of it, which is a very big jumble of words that maybe mean slightly different things. But then you've also got in Japan projects in place to incentivize companies diversifying their supply chain. And you've also got big projects of regional integration. And this is one of the areas where the UK is an anomaly. If you think about RCEP, announced this week, if you think about CPTPP, which has obviously been around for a little bit longer, but even USMCA, the big USMCA I'm not going to talk about in terms of benefits, because that's potentially worse than what was there before. But in terms of the other two, The big benefit there was simplifying the rules of origin, which allowed for tariff-free trade between the partners to be more readily available and to allow for the integration of supply chains. And so I think some positives. I think the UK is going to have a bit of an uphill struggle, because I think people talk about globalization, but I think we should largely be talking about regionalization. Whilst it's true that some supply chains do span the globe, if you're looking at heavy industry, it tends to be local to specific areas, and the UK is geographically in Europe's area, and trade is about to become harder. But upsides and downsides, and lots to look forward to.
Nice bit of optimism, though. That's good at this point in the week. That's useful. Mark, I just wonder whether you have any thoughts. How have the past few years affected Rockwell?
If I took myself off mute, that would help. Thanks, Callum. Yeah, I think the last few years have been challenging for all companies, not just Rockwell. But I think Brexit has, in some ways, prepared us as a company a little bit. As a country, a little bit better for some of the challenges that we're seeing now with COVID. I think most companies have been looking at their supply chain and their connected supply chain and how that's going to be impacted. This is the third time, essentially, we as a business have been reviewing our preparations for Brexit and getting ready for a potential time. And I think that has increased the potential agility of organisations in the UK, and possibly I'm going to stick with the optimistic theme. It's possibly given us a little bit of a head start ahead of some other countries who maybe didn't foresee any specific challenges with Brexit, or maybe not such large challenges with Brexit to their existing organisation, and that means that we're maybe a step ahead in some ways of our counterparts in the rest of the EU in making sure that our supply chains are resilient and are prepared. Clearly, I don't think any of us had planning in place for COVID or a situation like COVID, but some of the preparations that we've been going through from a Brexit perspective has certainly affected us in a positive way and enabled us to take advantage of situations that may come out as we go into a period of growth back from a negative period that we've seen during 2020.
Brilliant, thank you. And Namisha, I wonder whether you have any thoughts. Obviously, we've heard a bit of optimism from our last two speakers. What are you hoping to see over the next few years?
I'll do the same. Yes, overall, I think pretty much what everybody else is saying. I think there's a lot of optimism as we go forward. Yes, there'll be a bit of hard work to put in, lots of learning. But I think everything Stephen said, I'd agree with in terms of, all the points he made. We are, in the long term, I think what we need to do, obviously, is to create strong supply chains, onshoring, innovation. I think all of those things are important in the long term. But what we do obviously need to do is to build a lasting relationship. But I think I'd say we do need trade outside of the EU. EU has been an easy trade so far. Sending a pallet to Belgium has been as easy as sending a pallet to Birmingham so far. That's not going to be the case anymore. And Brexit has made us look and find that there is actually a world outside of the EU that we can trade with. And it's actually a lot of fantastic opportunities. British manufacturing is well renowned everywhere, and they trust our quality, the quality of our produce, the rigorous checks and balances we have to go through before we can put anything on a supermarket shelf, especially when it comes to food. And I'm sure it's the same in all industries as well. And I think, given what I would like to do is to say, given COVID and how we have been buying, I think, more local produce, is to promote more British manufactured goods, not just outside of the UK, but also to our consumers here, on a B2B platform as well. So I think not getting cheap imports from China that undermine everything that we have to go through in order to produce our goods. So I think let's promote the British manufacturing industry a lot more within the UK and make it as world renowned as it is outside of the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mike Mannock, I just wonder, we'll move on to talk about the medium and long-term opportunities and challenges in a few minutes. I just wonder, in the short term, though, in terms of getting through COVID, in terms of navigating the changes with Brexit in the new year, how confident are you about how straightforward that will be for your businesses, for your business and others in the industry?
Well, obviously, I look at it from an SME perspective, and nothing is ever straightforward, and the topography always changes, as we know that. And the one thing, in the future, this is a perfect storm, will no doubt be studied by business schools as part of the key curriculum, because it sets so many challenges that are almost impossible. So in terms of the next 5 years, well, it is the crystal ball question, and then trying to unpick the current geopolitical, social, commercial trade boundaries, including potential shift of commercial powers, over the next 5 to 10 years will be challenging. But we do have to have a strategy. But one thing is clear, as Stephen said, UK manufacturing is not a stranger to this, and we are good at exporting. And our domestic markets won't be able to support us. So therefore, we do need to drive that forward. In terms of the pandemic, one thing, in terms of COVID, which differs, I think, from other recessions, in fact, it's had a leveling out effect. The impact has been on all nations, in terms of equal terms. And there could be some opportunities to that. Each government is trying to protect the sort of delicate, business eco-structure. So when the curtain goes up, hopefully we'll be able to kick back into gear pretty quickly. But the longer this takes, obviously, there's going to be that strain on the supply chain and potential supply chains collapsing. So we need to look at that in the future in terms of how they are set up. And outside of this, it's difficult to say, but we'll hopefully see a time of stability and governments taking the opportunity to reset the global trade order, and hopefully have more of a positive "we're in this together" approach. So I'm hoping we'll have a leveling up period of collaboration. There will be a level of infrastructure investment in all countries that hopefully we can support and be part of and help to underpin. No matter what my views, though, that ultimately it's going to be down to the international governments and our government setting strong policies, and for the UK government setting clarity for SMEs, because that's what we just haven't had. And whether we'll ever get it, I don't know. But we do need a level of clarity. We do need a level of certainty for how the markets move forward. But also the fact is we can't stop. We still have to move forward despite everything else as businesses. We still need to survive.
Great, thank you. I can see we've had a few questions already coming in, so please keep them coming, and we'll try and get around to as many as possible towards the end of the hour. Our second topic, if we move on slightly, is all about global Britain, though, and there were a few responses there really getting into that topic. But as the UK leaves the EU, the government has made clear that it really wants to strengthen trade ties around the world. I guess the key question here is what this all means for businesses and industries across the UK, though. So, Sam, as we start, I wondered if you could set the scene a bit, because Downing Street's obviously been at work for quite some time now on a free trade agreement with our largest trade partner, the EU. Do you think we're likely to get one relatively imminently, as press reports would suggest?
So I've always been quite optimistic on the outcome of the UK-EU negotiations, in that I do think a free trade agreement can be reached, and most probably will be. I think it is obviously preferential to there not being one, but we have to be honest about the limitations of the agreement that's on the table, in that whilst it will remove tariffs and quotas, it's not going to facilitate trade and services to any great degree, and it is going to be accompanied by a large increase in bureaucracy and admin. There'll be customs declarations, safety and security declarations, checks on products of animal origin, and the like. We are going to a much less integrated relationship with the EU regardless. But yeah, so I'm feeling positive about the possibility of an agreement being reached. I think anyone who's been following it known what the compromise looked like since last November. It's just a case of whether the politicians are ready to make that compromise, and if they do, how they sell it domestically on both sides of the channel. And hopefully we'll find out soon. In terms of what the UK's doing elsewhere and its ambition for global Britain, I think it's becoming better at articulating it. In terms of what it's done so far, I think Julian's work has been excellent at the WTO, and I also think that the UK's attempts to replicate the existing EU trade agreements is something they should receive more credit for than they do, in that they have, to my mind, exceeded expectations, and I would also expect there to be some more good news in the next days. So I think that's something that we should acknowledge. I think in terms of other things, I think free ports, I'm sorry if anyone here is from a port, I think waste of time. US agreement, probably a waste of time, because it's just too unpopular to actually get it over the line domestically. I think Australia and New Zealand, quite possible. I think that's probably something that can be achieved next year. And I think CPTPP is definitely something the UK should be looking at, and actually something that will realistically be achieved. So a bit of a mixed view. I think what the government needs now is actually a narrative. What ties all of this together? What ties all of these disparate trends? And I think one of the things they should be focusing on is this idea of resilience. Because if you think about Australia, just to use an example, or New Zealand, and I realise different sorts of countries, but one of the reasons they prioritize trade agreements with lots of different countries at once and removing barriers is because they want to build resilience. They want to know that if they get shut out of a big market, e.g. China, which is sort of what's happening to Australia at the moment, there will be other options available to their companies. And I think that's something, that sort of mindset is potentially something the UK should be thinking about. It's about optionality. It's about being able to move quickly if for some reason or other you start to have problems in a specific market. So I'll stop there.
No, brilliant. It's all fantastic and really useful. Thank you. Stephen, obviously you were mentioning earlier that manufacturers by nature tend to be very good exporters, but how much do they, certainly manufacturers in the UK, have to gain from new markets beyond the EU after Brexit? Something we hear about time and again in government speeches and press releases over the last few years. Do you think there's opportunity out there that's untapped at the moment?
I think there is, Callum. I think it depends on what it is. It's not going to be a direct replacement for the sort of integrated supply stuff we're doing with the EU. That's clear, because as we've all said, that's about proximity. That's a very, very different matter, and we'll try and protect as much of that as we possibly can. But it is about the new technology areas, and certainly the discussions I've been having with, as I said, with many of the interested parties that DIT are involved in, and actually, sitting on our regular DIT updates, there is a high focus on the innovative part of manufacturing, a high focus on giving preferential access, if you like, to those new technologies that we have. And so our place in the world is a highly innovative country that's really good at this, coming up with the right solutions for many of the current problems we've got, particularly on the environmental agenda, is, I think, going to put us in good stead. So that I think is something that's really should be front and center. It's not the traditional way of doing it. I mean, Australia is not going to buy a lot of things from us, but actually what they are going to buy a lot of is hydrogen technology because of their national hydrogen agenda. And what they're really interested in is how they can get access to all of our innovative SMEs that are involved in that sector, because they don't have them in Australia. So it's those sorts of opportunities, I think, that we do have in front of us. Other areas, like in the US, 20% of our exports in manufactured goods go to the US without a trade deal. It's fine. It works well now without a trade deal. And that's really on the basis of certain areas of our manufacturing capability, which are highly valued by the US, which they can't do locally themselves. I mean, there's a lot of red tape in doing it, but it does work very, very well. So on that point, I think I agree with Sam. It's probably a long route to imagine there'll be an imminent trade deal with the US coming up. But even with that, we do have a good basis of business. As a country, it's our single most important destination. So building on that is always at the top of the agenda, but most of it's around electronics and high technology things that we sell to the US. It's not the basic sort of commodity items, and that's the position we need to adopt. So we do see a lot of good opportunity there. And I think the last point I would make is that we are seen as a leader in digitization in manufacturing. We are getting there. We're doing a lot of initiatives. We are comparable with many of the other industrialized nations. And some of these new opportunities that we're seeing coming up are focused quite heavily on how we might, their local industry might learn from our digitization processes by partnering with UK businesses. And this is another opportunity we see in the sort of global trade focus going forwards.
Brilliant, thank you. And on Australia and the US, Tony Abbott's been speaking to MPs and delivering a very optimistic and positive assessment about the scope for what we might see over the next couple of months and years this morning. I just wonder, Namisha, do you have your eye on any fast-growing markets at the moment, which ministers like to reference in terms of exports going forward?
Well, we are currently speaking with Canada and Australia and the US, actually, all of which was something we've never done before, and this has only happened in the last 6 months for some reason. Some of it's come from DIT, some references from DIT, which has been fantastic when we work with them quite closely. And I think what we were talking about earlier, it's not just about export, it's also about import. And of course, trade is a two-way thing. we import quite a lot of fresh produce, so just-in-time products from the EU. So that would be the more worrying part for me than export is at the moment, in that whatever happens, whatever deal we have, am I still going to, somebody told me the other day, if you want to still import cucumbers from the EU when not in season in the UK, then we're going to have a trade deal. You know, I didn't know that before. I didn't know we couldn't just do it. So those are the kind of things that are more worrying for me, is importing fresh produce when we need it. I think the market is out there. We're making pretty much great inroads, and we have an innovative product. We're the only manufacturer of air-dried fruit and vegetable products in the UK. And we love doing what we do, and we have some great opportunities available to us to tout our Britishness and our innovative products. So no, I think it's all really, really exciting. And yes, there'll be a lot of hard work, but I think well worth doing, and SMEs are used to a lot of hard work and changes. So yeah, not something we're scared of, I don't think.
Excellent. And Julian Braithwaite, Sam spoke of the need for constructing some kind of narrative around global Britain over the next few years. The UK's obviously taken its independent seat now at the WTO. Liz Truss speaks quite a lot about making its voice heard. I just wonder what global Britain looks like to you on the global stage now, and what it might look like over the years ahead.
Thanks, Callum. I mean, I think coming back to what Sam was saying earlier, I mean, the immediate priority is as far as possible to replicate the trade arrangements we have. That's easier said than done in certain contexts. The EU negotiations clearly the most fraught and most difficult in that regard. But we've had some success in rolling over our trade deals as part of the EU with our key markets like Switzerland, Korea, Japan, and the like. And what we've done in the WTO is, in effect, take our existing position as part of the EU and replicate it as far as that's humanly possible. All of that sounds like a lot of work for just staying still, and in one sense it is. But what it does mean is that actually, as of the end of this year, when we leave the EU's single market, we'll be in control of our trade policy here in the WTO and able to join the negotiations here to push forward trade deals, multilateral trade deals in the areas where we think it's most important, particularly, for example, in e-commerce, which is a negotiation that's going on at the moment, very, very important for British businesses, both manufacturing but also service exporters. But one of the things that struck me in the last couple of years is the degree to which other countries do understand how much they trade with the UK, but we don't really understand, or haven't really understood historically, how much we trade with them, because we've been part of the EU, all of our trade data has been aggregated EU-wide. But I've had permanent representatives from countries all over the world coming up to me saying there's great opportunities now that you're responsible for your trade policy, because when we talk about trading with Europe, we're talking about at least 50% of our trade going into the UK. And we'd like to talk to you about that and how we can deepen our bilateral trading relationship. That's countries like Sri Lanka, many other Commonwealth countries have these really high proportion of their trade into Europe comes into the UK. And now that we're responsible for thinking about how we can improve that two-way flow of trade, there are real opportunities there. And I think that's what sort of global Britain means. It means us thinking globally about our trading relationships and bringing trade into our bilateral relationships with countries we've always been close with around the world, not least for historical reasons, but that we haven't really seen the trade part of that relationship, and bringing that into it and seeing how we can get together and actually improve trade between our two countries and do that across the piece. I think, as Sam said, doing it in a way that gives us resilience and gives us options. But as a British government official, this has really forced someone like me to really think globally in a way that perhaps we didn't have to do before, because trade policy was sort of outsourced to Brussels and to the EU, and they did it for us. Now we have to do it for ourselves. Obviously, that involves there are challenges with that, but there are also opportunities in terms of really thinking through how we can build those trading relationships with countries around the world where we've had long political relationships, but we haven't really been thinking about deepening the trade relationship until now.
Excellent, thank you. Mike, I just wonder, the government's obviously keen to persuade as many SMEs as possible to start exporting, particularly those that haven't really thought about it up until now. What does Global Britain mean for companies like yours?
I think it's down to a mentality in many ways as a starting point, and we're always trying to drive that forward. In terms of our business, we just got we're open for business mentality. We don't think in terms of a regional aspect. We think of the national. The phone rings, we pick it up, and we do business. Excuse me. Now that's a little bit more simplified because we are a service-based business, and we're selling skills and knowledge out into the marketplace. I mean, 70% of our work currently is in North America. in a market you think that would be quite competitive, but for us, we're opening that. Turkey, there's some real opportunities in Turkey, and Stephen and I were out there at the beginning of the year, and there's new markets there. And then so the key thing for SMEs is not to make assumptions that they won't necessarily fit into those marketplaces. I mean, you look at Turkey, in terms of their education process, they're driving forward their investment, but there are in many ways they're a young nation and a young people, and they still need that backbone of experience to be able to support them to move their economy forwards. And I think a lot of emerging economies will need that support that we can give that. And when we have boots on the ground, when we were able to travel, it is amazing that, and I'm still always astounded, the fact that Britain does have a very strong brand, and we just need to underpin that and make sure that that continues to move forward. But for the government side of things, again, looking at SMEs is to really understand the challenges. I mentioned earlier that the SMEs have. We only have a certain amount of human capital and bandwidth to be able to take things forward. We are trailing behind, as Stephen had mentioned about the digital era is so important for us to get on a par with our competitors. So we need a recapitalization program. We need an investment program. We need a skills, training program that's aligned. And more importantly for me, we need an industrial strategy that aligns to digital, aligns to skills, and right across the board, so it's down as a single challenge. Because there's so many things. I mean, if you look at where the green economy is going to take us, net zero is a huge opportunity for our SMEs because of our technical capability. However, we need to understand in many ways, what does that market look like in the next 5 years? I don't think it's going to be cost driven. It's going to be about your values and who you are as an organization and as a country, and the views of our customers are going to change. So the whole ecostructure is moving rapidly, but we really do need to underpin and help and support the SMEs to make them fighting fit to move forward, because there is a will there, but there's so many different things on the agenda at the moment that it makes it difficult. The danger is that we will go into ourselves and we will lock down and draw the drawbridge up and wait for the world to change, and we haven't got time to do that. We need to be able to have the confidence to move forward.
Do you have any thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I think to Mike's point, education's a key area. From a UK perspective, we've been typically, I think we're very well respected outside of the UK, and as somebody that manages a business that's both within the EU and the UK, which clearly is not going to be part of the EU from the start of next year. I think our high-tech industries and how well respected our manufacturing industries from outside of the UK is probably not appreciated within the UK. But I think there are areas where the government could really invest and continue to invest. SMEs are going to be an area where we show innovation already and we show agility, but without the skills base for those SMEs in order for them to expand, then I think we're not going to give ourselves the best opportunity going forwards. I think infrastructure is another area where we really need to think. I think COVID has given us and many other companies like us a different perspective on working remotely. And I think in order to do that successfully, there are some key fundamentals that we need in the infrastructure side of things. Reliable broadband and accessibility, we're all able to join today in a virtual environment. But that's not necessarily possible for people in all areas of the UK. And that's somewhere where we really are lagging behind the rest of the world. And if we start talking about digital technology and digital industry, being connected is absolutely vital. I think another area where I think Stephen said previously that we were in a reasonable shape from a digital perspective, but from an automation perspective, and certainly from a productivity perspective, we're lagging again in some key areas. So investing in the automation space, particularly with those SMEs where increased capital at the start of the process and support from the government would be very helpful, and would really enable those companies to be more competitive. And then, as I said, education. As part of the EU, we've been investing significant sums in research and in the educational space, and we really need to continue to do that, because the foundation of our success, not just within the EU but in global markets, is really based on that educational level and high intellectual property, and that's where we can add value from a customer perspective, and it's a significant element of our export.
Excellent, thank you. Our third and final topic today is all about navigating the challenges on the global stage right now. We've obviously touched on it again and again already, but the COVID-19 crisis continues, protectionism remains rife. Once the pandemic's over, I'll be interested to hear where you think the opportunities and the growth areas are on the other side. Perhaps we could start with you, Namisha. You obviously mentioned that you work with DIT already. How can Whitehall and how should Whitehall be supporting companies to export to new markets or increase exports to up and coming markets right now?
I think the government's already doing quite a lot. You just have to, SMEs find it difficult to know what's out there and what's available. I, from time to time, have access to various DIT officials who let me know of initiatives that are out there that I can take advantage of. And I think grants, investing in automation is, yes, great. But I think training, as I think Mike mentioned earlier, is really important. We're right at this moment in the process of getting some training. It's funded, it's out of an EU fund, training on Brexit and what we should expect. And that's been fantastic for us, because so far we've been very much, oh, well, there's no need to prepare. We don't really need to do anything because we don't know what the deal is going to be. We have better things to do with our time as a small business than guess what we need to prepare for. We haven't done any preparation at all until now. So training has been absolutely fantastic. We've also had grants available to us previously when it came to importing, exporting, helping us with that. We did trade, there were trade delegations that we were part of. And I think all those things need to continue for us to grow further. So a lot of it, I believe, has been EU funding up until now. So all of those grants, all the trade delegations, all the training, etc., has been EU. What I'd like to see, and I'm sure will happen, is that it will be UK funding that will replace all of that, so we don't use it. We have R&D tax rebate, which has been fantastic, which has supported us over the last few years. It's been amazing. I'm hoping that's going to continue. Innovate UK, we've had grants from them. We've applied for a couple of marketing and packaging and things like that that we wanted funding for, and we were successful. But all those things are really difficult sometimes for us to manage to access because we don't have the time. So I think maybe having the process simplified a little bit would help. But I think the UK is already doing a huge amount, and I'm really proud of what we do. There is access to a lot of funding. We just need to find it, and I hopefully it continues once we don't have any more money in the pot left from the EU.
Brilliant, thank you. Julian, I just wonder, you mentioned earlier that the WTO has perhaps been making a few headlines for the wrong reasons over the last year or so. I just wonder, aside from appointing a new Director General at some point, how can it remain relevant, regain its stature, and really support businesses of all sizes through COVID and through the various other disruptions which we've seen currently and will probably continue to be a factor over the next couple of years?
So, the best way it can demonstrate its continued usefulness is by reaching agreements on the things that really matter to businesses around the world in terms of trade. And and also to show how trade, really importantly, show how trade can actually support sustainable development, and that trade liberalization and greater trade need not be at the expense of the environment. So there's a big negotiation going on at the moment over sustainable fishing and on removing harmful fishing subsidies. And this is a big multilateral agreement. The whole world, all the WTO membership is involved in it. Getting that across the line will be a really important signal that the WTO is still in the business of reaching these big multilateral trade agreements that do both improve trade, but also do so in a sustainable way. That's one example. The other thing that's happened in the last couple of years is the beginning of these sort of coalitions of the willing negotiations, or what's known as plurilaterals, so a subset of the WTO's 164 members coming together around issues where those countries really do want to advance collectively new rules, new trade liberalizations. And so there's a number of those. I mentioned the e-commerce negotiations earlier. Digital trade is one of the most fastest growing drivers of international trade, has been perhaps the fastest growing driver of international trade in recent years. But you need to have more common rules internationally in order to really unlock that. And there is a negotiation going on with about 90 members of the WTO now to take that forward. And getting that across the line in the next year or so will again be really important for really locking in rules around things like data, how you treat data, data localization issues, and how you ensure the sort of the free movement of data, if you like, across borders, which is essential to the internet and to digital trade. There's also an initiative on micro and small and medium-sized enterprises and how to make international trade easier for them by removing some of the sort of bureaucracy at borders that they have to deal with. So there's a number of initiatives like that, which are, they've only started in the last year or so. But if those get across the line, I think it'll demonstrate that the WTO is again moving forward on things that really matter to businesses in terms of making it easier for them to trade around the world. I mean, these WTO agreements are really just pieces of paper unless they really make trade easier for business. And one of the important things about meetings like today is the way in which it brings in the business community, organizations like Make UK into these negotiations so that people like me can ensure that what ends up getting agreed is actually going to make a difference for people trading around the world or seeking to do more trade around the world, like Nim's company or Mark's or others.
Thank you. And so I suppose leading on from that, Mark, what would help you to do more trade around the world? What would help Rockwell to really boost its imports and exports and its trade relationships with key markets?
So we're a global multinational, so we trade around the world already in that respect. I think the things that we should be thinking about from a UK perspective is that Europe won't close down to UK businesses overnight, despite the political challenges that we see and some of the hysteria, for want of a better word, in the media. The reality is that business is driven by people generating trust between organizations and developing that trusting relationship over a period of time. Where you're based and where your company is founded has an impact on that. And I think the UK is still seen from an external perspective as being a highly trustworthy country, place where people can do business and can do business with a high level of expectation that contracts will be delivered in the way that they are expected. So I think what we should be thinking about is how we continue to build relationships from the UK into other parts of the world, not just Europe, but continue to do that outside. We need to think about some of the standards that we have, both in the digital environment, which was just mentioned, but also in terms of the standards that we expect when we're exporting and importing. I see there's a question in the Q&A on how is regulation going to work and whether we should follow EU or US standards. I think it doesn't necessarily matter. Particularly, there will be pluses and minuses to each set of standards. But what we do need is for the government to come to a conclusion on which standards we will follow, and not try and introduce new standards that we as the UK will go forward with in our own environment, because that just adds cost. With relatively little value to companies that manufacture and want to import or export from or to the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. And Mike, I wonder what I could, whether I could ask you about some of the markets the UK government talks about at the moment. So we heard a few weeks ago a lot about Japan after there was a continuity deal with Tokyo. There will be more of those to come over the next few days, I expect. And we hear a lot about Australia and New Zealand and the United States and even the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I wonder, do you see much opportunity in these kind of markets for manufacturers and companies like yours and across the board?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's how we're sold as the UK brand is the most important thing, and then obviously COVID has created some real challenges where we just haven't been able to get out into the countries, and how that resets itself in the future is anybody's guess, especially with this sort of a digital approach. But what we found clients and new customers that actually they still want to have that face-to-face meeting, and that everything's on hold waiting for the opportunity for us to meet and then build that relationship. So relationships and humans, human interpersonal skills are still going to be key even in the digital age. And a number of countries that I visited, you have to visit 2 to 3 times, so they're actually serious, that they know you're serious about investing in that country, investing in your skills and time, and then you want to create a really strong relationship. So that's crucial. The other side, I think, for the support from the UK government will be on the emerging markets. I think we've had superb support through the DIT. Through the consulates and basically in terms of SMEs, they just need to really knock on the door of the DIT and just ask the questions and say, what can you do to help me? I think they'll be amazed. It's not absolutely perfect, but I think it's a great support mechanism. But one thing I think we do need is in the emerging markets is to be able to, there's a level of risk in there. And for companies to go in, they actually sit back and wait to see how the market evolves and maybe lose some of the opportunity. But if you've got some strong government backing, you can get in there and they can give some reassurances that if something does go wrong, they can help you. So therefore, we can pioneer and drive forward, for the new UK PLC and our position in the global marketplace will be crucial. So that needs to really be underpinned. And then the other thing that I think I worry about more at the moment is like all businesses, but also the government. They need to have the bandwidth to take on these opportunities now. They're so ingrained and so tied into COVID and what the effect of COVID. It's all about the here and now rather than necessarily the future. We do need to tie into our investment into R&D to make sure innovation comes forward. That's what Britain is good at, and it's a real key selling point. And so they need to make the time and open up the bandwidth because, they are a majority government. They have the opportunity to push things through, but they need to tie into the likes of Make UK, with 20,000 members, real-time data feed straight into government to say what manufacturers need, how we need it and when we need it. And so they need those partnerships to make sure we can take that forward. But I still think it's very positive. We need to move forward. I'm not sure how we're going to reset, but we still need to do business with people. And for the new market opportunities, how the government is going to underpin that to de-risk it.
Sam, I just wonder, British journalists like me are often accused of seeing everything through the Brexit prism, but humour me if you will. Do you think the current backdrop, be it COVID, be it the presidential election outcome, all the other different factors on the global stage right now, do you think they make it easier on the whole or harder for the UK to seek all the trade deals? Obviously, you made some interesting points about which you thought were more likely than others and which you thought were more sensible than others earlier. But do you think the broader picture makes it easier or harder as DIT chases these deals across the world?
Well, if we're being honest, there's never a particularly good time to put up barriers to trade with your most important trading partner. And probably doing it in the middle of a pandemic is a particularly bad time to do it. So in that sense, the odds are stacked against the UK slightly. But of course, if you accept that is the decision of the British people and that is what is happening, you then have to look at it through the lens of, okay, so what can the UK do? And of course, there are opportunities there. In terms of my mind, in terms of importance, I think we need to talk about trade and investment, not just about, sorry, my screen just flicked off, because actually the UK's economic relationship with the rest of the world isn't actually one of exports in terms of what drives the UK economy, it's investment. We're never going to have an export-driven economy in the same way that Germany does, just because it's not the UK's model. And my fear, I suppose, over the coming years is that, and in relation to Brexit, is not so much that people will leave the UK, although I think that is a risk to an extent. It's more that future investment won't come to the UK, it will go somewhere else in Europe or the like. And the reason I think that needs to be at the top of people's mind is that there are things the government can do to ensure that doesn't happen. because investment isn't just about the UK's trading relationship with the EU. There are lots of reasons why companies invest here, but that obviously plays a big part. But it's also about skills, it's about people, it's about infrastructure, it's about the immigration regime of the UK, how easy it is when you're investing in the UK to bring in some of your own people. And these are all things that are very much in the UK's control that can work as a counterweight to the deadweight cost, which is putting up barriers to trade with Europe. So I think there are people in government thinking about that. There's been recent announcement to launch some new body that looks at investment into the UK. So that's good, that's positive. And then I just think in terms of other things the UK needs to be thinking about, it's just ensuring its trade policy is coherent with its other international objectives. So if we think climate's going to be a big issue for the UK this year, we're hosting the climate talks. Then today we've had the announcement on electric vehicles and the plans to essentially move there entirely in about 10 years' time. But it's sort of little understood that currently, probably apart from Japan, the Japan agreement, it's nearly impossible for electric vehicles to qualify for any of the EU and subsequently the UK's free trade agreements, because the rules of origin just don't work. So this is actually somewhere where I think the UK could and should over the next years review those agreements to ensure that electric vehicles qualify, because otherwise you have a situation in which you can trade tariff-free in diesel and petrol cars, but not electric vehicles. And I don't see how that's coherent with the rest of the agenda. So yes, I've sort of gone on a bit of a wild ride there, but I think it's important to see how all of these different things link together and how it needs to be pulled together into a coherent vision of what the UK does in the world.
And like you say, it's all interconnected. I just wonder, Stephen, before we throw open to questions, we've had a significant number of continuity trade agreements already. We've had Japan most recently in terms of the big ticket free trade agreements, and also we're expecting, or we're told to expect, something on the EU and other markets relatively soon. I just wonder, so far, has industry been adequately consulted on these free trade agreements? There are various ministers who now make the point at the end of the day it's businesses that trade, not governments. And do you and organisations like yours feel like you're getting a hearing at the moment?
I think it's improved a lot, Callum, is the honest answer to that. We're involved in the trade advisory groups with DIT. So that gives us an opportunity to get sort of really on the front foot in terms of the current situation, where the negotiations have got to. Gives us an opportunity to input our thoughts about certain aspects of those trade deals to make it more conducive to manufacturers. And I think that whole relationship has improved quite dramatically this year. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Certainly not as rigorous as the US relationship with its industry. And we work very closely with our counterparts in the US and with the National Association of Manufacturers in Washington. And they have a very rigorous process of engagement with USTR whenever they're negotiating external trade deals, which is kind of very process driven, and everyone's involved. So they've been on the other side of the table on inputting into the US trade deal discussions with the UK, for example. So we've been able to compare and contrast notes, as is kind of an ad hoc round the table with a cup of tea chat. Theirs is, go away and do all the homework and let's have all the data and let's have all the evidence. I think they've had more than 4,000 businesses involved in preparation for the UK trade deal negotiations, and it's not quite the same situation here. So we do have some things to learn. I think in defence of where the government's been, we haven't had to do this for many years, have we? So we don't have the similar rigorous process that the US might have, which does bring me on to my pet subject, Callum, about DIT. I mean, having worked in DIT and UKTI before it and know and love the organisation well, my one thing, and I say this to everyone, including the Prime Minister constantly, is that if we are going to be global, if we are serious about this, then for goodness sake, let's put some resource into DIT. It is the smallest funded department in Whitehall. We spend £500 million a year on DIT as a department, and most departments are in the tens of billions when you look at the scale of what we spend on them. So one thing we could do is ramp up the amount of resource that DIT has, so that we can do all the things that Mike's been talking about and the great experiences that NIM's had, expand those dramatically, particularly into areas where we aren't at the moment negotiating trade deals and where we do want to do penetration. So we should be, walking the walk a little bit here and actually putting some money behind it as part of the push for DIT going forwards, I think.
I'm sure that will go down well in DIT. So thank you, Stephen. We've got a few minutes left. We're running out of time, but I just want to go to a few of the questions we've got. I wonder whether I could put this to you, Julian. David Smith asks, and this is something that you referred to earlier, do you see the Biden victory as potentially the beginning of the end of widespread nationalism and protectionism? He does say we may not wish to talk about politics, and I understand you might be a bit restricted in what you can say, but I'd be interested to know what you think.
Well, it will. I mean, I think we'll see a Biden administration re-engaging with the sort of the international system in a way that perhaps we haven't seen for the last few years. I don't think that means that they're going to be any less focused on what they see as the problems with things like the global trading system. I think there's a bipartisan view in the US that actually the global trading system, WTO, lets China off a bit lightly in terms of the rules, and that China and that there needs to be more sort of disciplines around technology transfer, industrial subsidies, state-owned enterprises, so that there's more of a fair global playing field, if you like, for trade. When China joined the WTO in 2000, it was a bit player in the global trading system. Now it is the biggest player. And I think the Americans are going to remain very focused on that, including here in the WTO. But I was here when the Obama administration was still in power, and they engaged very differently in the WTO. And if we see a return to that, I think that means we'll be able to do more business here, and the Americans will be tough, but they will be pushing the organization in a way that I think will be helpful in terms of moving it forward and getting things done, and in terms of raising ambition. So I think there are real opportunities with the incoming administration. As I say, I don't think it'll be the end of sort of modern politics as we've seen it, and some return to some sort of 1990s past or even before. But it will mean that we'll have real partners in these multilateral organizations like the WTO that we can work with.
Brilliant, thank you. Stephen Fitzsimmons asks, and I think this is off the back of this morning's announcement from the government about the phase out of petrol and diesel. He says the UK automotive sector is behind on electric vehicle manufacturing. Can we catch up? And I just wonder, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's lots of debate about this, of course. Quite right that we're behind. Quite right we're behind, particularly in investments in gigafactories in the UK, which means that to the point that was made earlier on rules of origin, that 50% of the content of an electric vehicle is actually the battery and the battery system. So if we're importing it, it makes it really difficult to qualify on rules of origin for exporting the vehicles, which is the key issue there. We are making some strides. What's very interesting, I think, is the new technology vehicles that are coming through, and particularly we're making a lot of. There's quite a thought process amongst some of the manufacturers, certainly, that we should be pushing ahead with hydrogen fuel cells. That's really where there's a lot of innovative, leading edge thinking in the UK in terms of what we could bring to that party. So there was a debate around that, and maybe bringing forward targets actually pushes us further to leapfrogging one generation over EVs and going to hydrogen. That's one of the thoughts that's there, because actually, if you look at the Germans and the French in particular, I mean, Germans put now 6 billion euros into their gigafactory. We're a long way behind that side of it, so we'd have to import. So there is this thought process about, can we go one step beyond just thinking about EVs? And that's a debate that's going on right now with the government.
Brilliant, thank you, Stephen. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and this conversation has been really interesting, so I could probably extend it instinctively for hours to come, but I won't take up the rest of anyone else's afternoon. But many thanks to our panel, to Julian Braithwaite, Stephen Phipson, Mark Bottomley, Namisha Raja, Mike Maddock, and Sam Lowe. Have a fantastic afternoon, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Thanks, Callum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Callum.
Thank you.
Thanks all.